All right. Well, I am very excited today to share with you a dear colleague. I got to know Joe through some mutual acquaintances, and I got the benefit of actually seeing him do a really amazing session. And in that teaching session, he actually incorporated Aikido into his lecture and wove it in and illustrated a lot of his points with a physical demonstration, which was awesome. And then I also read Joe's book, Unlock Your Charisma, and totally fell in love with it. So now Joe is here with us today to share some really deep insights around what it is to unlock your executive presence. And so welcome, Joe.
Thanks, Kirsten, so much for having me. And I just have to say, I was so proud of you and your colleagues when you wrote Shifting, How School Leaders Can Create a Culture of Change. I really enjoyed the book and learned a lot of great concepts from that as well.
Awesome. So my students are all ears.
Okay, here we go. So today we're going to talk about unlocking your executive presence with a bit of a diversity twist. Now, to start, I just want to tell everyone who's listening that most of us who are on this video chat will not fulfill their potential, right? We're not going to fulfill it. And it's not because you're not smart enough, you are. It's not because you're not educated enough, you're getting even more education as we speak. And it's not because you're not talented or don't have loyalty or values. I imagine you have all those and have made a great decision taking Kirsten's class. The reason why most of us will not fulfill our potential is although we are concentrating on a lot of the right things, the tendency is to miss one of the most important things for your continued upward advancement and success, and that is executive presence. So today we're going to talk a little bit about what that means, how you get it, and also what that means if you're a diverse or underrepresented professional. So if we're going to talk about executive presence and diversity, it'll probably help to understand what I mean when I say executive presence. If you ask 10 of your professors or 10 of your classmates or 10 of your coworkers what executive presence is, how many different answers do you think you'll get back? Right? And if you ask someone you know who has great executive presence how they get it and what they do, what percentage likelihood do you think they'll actually be able to give you some advice and then you'll use it the next day and it's like, wow, I'm glad I talked to them. I have amazing executive presence now.
I bet a lot of folks who have it have no idea how to explain it or break it down or help somebody else have it.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right, Kirsten. And that leads us to kind of believe like, oh, you have to be born with it, right? Or you either have it or you don't. But I'm here to tell you that executive presence is a skill and it operates like any other skill based on certain principles. And if you can master the principles and execute them, you will have that ability. So let's dive in a little bit deeper. It's pretty easy to look at executive presence just by breaking down the two words in the term. Executive, right? What is an executive? Executive comes from the Latin word exequi, which means to carry out, right? So if you stop and think about it, an executive is someone who's hired or tasked to get things done, right? To carry out plans. That's what makes you an executive and not just an ordinary worker. Now, it's called executive presence, not executive doing, not executive dress up, right? So what does it mean that someone has presence, right? Do I have to do anything to have presence? Do I have to have a title to have presence? I think you know you don't. You walk into a room and you feel the presence of the various players and people in the room. So executive presence has to do with the feeling, right? People feel like you're an executive. So what does that mean a little bit more specifically? The definition of executive presence and the feeling that it gives is the ability to inspire confidence that you can lead well in a given situation, right? Not someone else, but you're the one who I want to follow. I don't know why. There's just something about the way you hold yourself and the way you are in the room that says, you know what, I'm going to follow this guy or gal and not that one. So without getting too complicated, that is what executive presence is. And the important thing about knowing that is if you can't explain the mechanism behind how something works, you can't get more of it. You can't just say, I want more of something or something like what that person has. But if you can't really identify what it is, you'll have a lot of difficulty getting more of it. So, what does executive presence mean for diverse or underrepresented professionals, right? So let's do a quick exercise. If I could ask everyone just to close your eyes, or if you don't want to close your eyes, just imagine in your mind's eye the CEO of a Fortune 500 company, right? What do they look like? What's their hair like? What's their stature? How are they dressed? Their jaw, right? What kind of accessories do they have on? Right? So just imagine that, like really lock in an image of that CEO, right? I'll do that too. Do you have it? Okay, great. Now, look in the mirror or think about how you look and compare what that CEO looks like in your mind's eye and what you look like. Now, if those two aren't the same, you have a problem, right? Because even if you picture yourself as the CEO, I can guarantee you most of the people on this call, most of the people in the organizations we all work for or will work for, picture a certain stereotypical CEO. And if you don't match that, then you have a problem in terms of executive presence. And there's a theory called implicit leader theory, right? Which is we all have in our mind's eye what a leader should sound like, look like, move like. And if you match that, right, the path to executive presence, much easier sailing than if you don't look like that, right? So that's why when we talk about diversity, it's not just a black-white thing or a male-female thing. If you don't, fit a very specific template of what that next level leader is going to be in the organization, you are going to have some challenges when it comes to executive presence. Now, we're here for solutions, right? Not just to talk about problems. So let's imagine that you're about to go into a presentation, and this is one of these kind of like can really make your career type pitches or presentations. And it's you, and then there's someone else who's competing as well, either a colleague or a competitor. And you don't happen to match, right, the stereotype for someone who would win this business, and the other person does, right? So what do? Do you just go home? You've lost just because someone else has an advantage? How do you win over the crowd despite the fact that you're starting a little bit behind because the initial supposition is, wow, this person looks like they're going to win, and this person, I'm not so sure about. The approach you want to take is you want to build your club, okay? When you go into that meeting, right, think about the impact. If there's 4 people, let's say you're trying to win some venture capital and there are 4 people in the room, and one of the partners is a big fan of yours and says, listen to this guy or listen to this gal. They really have an amazing story to tell. Think about the impact of just 25%, one person being on your team, right? They did a study published in Scientific American relatively recently where they were actually able to show at 25% a tipping point where minority positions or viewpoints became majority viewpoints. Because what happened is most people are undecided and don't really want to go out on a limb and do anything different. So no one really wants to be first. But when 25% of people were choosing the minority position, that 50% was like, hey, you know, that could be kind of cool too. And that 25% plus 50% became roughly 75%. So it flipped, right? So what was assumed to be not the one, all of a sudden became the one. So what I say to people is, if you are going into a situation or you're in a working environment where you are not considered by default the one, stack the deck, right? Do you know who's going to be in the meeting, right? Do you know who's on the leadership councils and the promotion boards? Do they know you? If nobody supports you, then you're at 0%. You're not even close to 25%, right? So what you really want to focus on anyway, right? But especially if you feel like people may not assume that you have leadership potential based on whatever traits or discrepancies you have with current leadership, build your club. Don't leave it to chance, right? You may spend a lot of time working on your decks and your pitch, but don't forget the relationships and the support that you can build alongside that to really tip things.
Yeah. And you know, sometimes if you're relatively junior, you don't even know who those people are. So like go find an org chart. To your point about who's going to be at the meeting, that is one of the most important things. And do I already know those people and do they already know me? And if not, how could I get a little bit of them knowing me, either introduction to them offline or you know, the idea of getting to know somebody on their team and then them introducing them. So this idea of sort of in your organization, do you know people at different levels? Do you know people in different departments? How many people have some awareness of who you are that could potentially be built towards being part of your club, right?
Absolutely, Kirsten. And it's not super secret, right? Like we're not operating like, you know, it's some super secret spy organization. I mean, the org chart's there.
Yeah, totally.
Excellent, excellent. All right. Now, the challenge doesn't always come from other people's perception. I'm sorry to tell you. If you don't resemble existing leadership, right, as a society in the organization, you have a problem with yourself too. And this is called stereotype threat, right? Because we've all, well, most of us have grown up in a certain society, right? Let's just assume we all grew up in America or have been educated here, lived here long enough to, you know, get the culture. And there are certain preferences, there are certain expectations, which we all kind of inherit and breed, right? And it doesn't matter if you are a diverse person, you are still subject to the prevailing norms that you see on TV, movies, the way people write about things, the way people talk to you and everyone else. So the problem with stereotype threat is when you're in a high performance situation, you need all your mental energy, right? Your prefrontal cortex, everything. You need all that mental firepower. What happens when you encounter difficulty and you start to stumble, right? Because you may not meet the stereotype of the successful person in that scenario, some of your mental firepower will be siphoned off to worry about, oh my gosh, am I really good enough? Or I have to represent all the women in the world or all the Native Americans in the world, because if I fail, then, you know, everyone's going to think that we're not good enough, right? This is a concern that if you meet the stereotype, you're not even thinking about it. You're just going about your business, performing as best as you can, right? So the stereotype threat is something that is generated from inside you that can actually hurt your performance without anyone else having to say a thing or do anything. We generate that ourselves. So what can you do to combat stereotype? Make your choice. Right? I'm not going to read through this quote. It's from an email by Jonathan Rowson. He's a Scottish grandmaster. This is one of the favorite things I've learned in recent memory. So to summarize, what he basically says is, if you wanted to accomplish something, and in his context, it's, become a chess world champion, if you want it, W-A-N-T, want it, you will fail, right? And the reason you will fail is because you will see what's missing. You'll see the gap, right? And you'll see all the things that you don't have. And somewhere along the way, it'll be too much and you'll give up or you'll get distracted. Something else will take priority and you will never truly accomplish that goal. What he says, and is part of the solution to combating stereotype threat, is if you choose to become world champion, then everything you do will be through the filter of being and becoming a world champion. So for example, if you look around and see other world champions and they all practice, I don't know, I'm making up a number, 12 hours a day playing, game scenarios. Guess what? You have to play 12 hours a day. You're tired, you're sick, you're hungry, doesn't matter, because what does a world champion do? A world champion plays 12 hours a day. If you notice that world champions all have teams and coaches that help them, they don't do it on their own. They're not silent geniuses, right? Then you realize, I need a team. Well, what happens if you don't have enough money for a team or you haven't met a team yet? Well, you're a world champion. You have no choice. You will beg, borrow, steal, do what it takes to find that team to support you, to make you your best. And the quote ends with two of the most powerful words in the English language: I am. When you choose who you are, right? Everything that you do aligns to that. And it almost feels like the world starts to align to that. Opportunities start to become visible. People start to look at you and think about you differently. Why? Because you have chosen that as your identity. And that is one way that you can really help combat that stereotype and say, look, I am that next position or that CEO or whatever it is. It's not something you want. Wouldn't it be nice? No, you have chosen that for yourself already.
Love it.
All right. Now, this topic, love the topic of authenticity, love all of Brene Brown's work on it. If you haven't read Daring Greatly or some of her other books, highly, highly recommend it. Now, people are understandably a little bit burnt out over authenticity. And I think sometimes the word is somehow misunderstood or oversimplified.
It's back to your point about executive presence. There's like a gazillion different definitions of authenticity.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, Kirsten, what you'll notice is a lot of people have this experience where they try to be authentic because everyone's telling them, right? Either their company is telling them in training or they read a book, we should be authentic, it unlocks your power. And then you go to be authentic, and what happens? People tell you, oh no, we don't want you to be that authentic, right? We just want you to be as authentic as we're comfortable with you being authentic, right? So that causes what I like to call a diversity dilemma. Okay? So if you are a diverse professional, right? It feels like you have to choose between embracing your authentic, most powerful, diverse self versus, and being penalized for that potentially, versus compromising who you are and trying to be more like everyone else so you can fit in and more seamlessly kind of move up. And that's quite the dilemma, because your most powerful self is not someone else. It is you, right? Contrary to maybe the reaction you're getting, but it is you being you. So how do we deal with this? How do we crack the code of authenticity? And one of the things that makes this tricky is I feel like people have a fundamental misunderstanding of what it means to be authentic. Being authentic doesn't mean saying, doing, acting however you want, and everyone should love you, right? That's not authenticity, right? That's just being just a bull in a china shop, right? That is just not going to work. We all know that, right? So the key here is when you have connection, right? Your authenticity becomes an asset. When you don't have connection, your authenticity becomes a liability. So let me give you a quick example. Something that happens all the time in pantries, maybe not so much during the pandemic, but at pantries and offices, people heating up food in the microwave, right? People get very sensitive about that, right? So let's say you're starting a new job and you bring in some food which is not pizza or, food that everyone is used to the smells of, right? So you love this food, it's delicious. Even you will admit it smells kind of weird, but you love the taste of it and you're super excited to be eating healthier. You bring it in and you go to heat it up. It's your first day on the job. Nobody knows you. You haven't even said hi to anyone. You go to your desk, you work, you go to lunch, you heat this up. Wow, it just, the whole place smells of your lunch, right? And people are walking by and they're coming in to heat up their lunch. What do you think the reaction is going to be towards you, right? I don't think you're going to get a positive reaction. And really, why would you? No one really knows you. All they know is that you're heating something up and they're not familiar with the smell and maybe it's very unpleasant to them. Now let's switch it up. Imagine that it's the same food, but instead you've been working now for a year and everybody knows you. You are a star performer, you volunteer for all these committees, you're mentoring several people, you've helped the company meet and beat their numbers. You are a star, right? And one day you have a guest come over and they bring the same delicious dish, and you love it so much, you're like, I'm gonna bring it in, I'm gonna heat it up for lunch. And you go into the pantry and you heat it up, and again, whoo, it is just aromatic, right? And other people come in who know you, right? They love you. You're their guy, you're their gal. And they're wondering who's heating this thing up, and they see you. Now, what do you think their reaction is going to be? Right? Maybe they'll be curious. Maybe they'll be like, hey, Joe, what is that? Does that taste good? Because it smells kind of weird, right? But you know what? I'm feeling kind of adventurous today. Let me try some of that, right? So as you can see, authenticity isn't some sort of birthright for people to like you, right? Without the connection, authenticity is a liability. When you have connection, your authenticity becomes an asset. You become quirky, you become interesting. These are novel ideas, as opposed to how dare you, right? So I like to call these the 3 C's, right? These 3 C's help you and others see your executive presence, even if you are a diverse, underrepresented professional, and you may not look like the implicit leader theory, right? You don't look like the standard issue leader. So remember, build your club, right? 25% they found is a somewhat magical number. Stack the deck. Don't go in there hoping that people like you. Get people to like you before you even get there. Next, make your choice. Choose the identity and everything aligns to your choice. And third, crack the code, right? Crack the code of authenticity. Connect first to make your authenticity an asset instead of a liability.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that guidance, Joe.
Absolutely. So thank you so much for allowing me to come on. I would love to stay connected to your students. My email's there, my mobile number, my website. I have 2 podcasts I'm running right now, and Kirsten has been on my podcast at least once, maybe twice. Why It Works, as well as The Big Lie. And those are 2 of my books, Unlock Your Charisma, as well as Unlock Your Executive Presence. So I wish some of this has been helpful to you, and best of luck in your career and with your executive presence and fulfilling your potential.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us.